Recently, I have noticed a kind of argument possessing the rare property of being utilized by most everyone, regardless of political affiliation or leaning. An argument that, upon examination, is a complete non sequitur, a total irrelevancy of a kind that puts someone on a completely different topic of conversation than the one at hand. The line of thinking to which I am referring is the fundamental conflation of the terms can and should. Allow me to elaborate. What does it mean that something can be done? It is a reference to possibility, to something that is able to physically happen in the world. Human beings can walk and talk, etc., with a few notable exceptions that eliminate these abilities. However, without the aid of machines, human beings cannot fly. What does this have to do with the word should? Should is a word necessary in a world where multiple actions can be taken, but not every potential action can be taken all at once. If in order to be done, some things require that other things not be done, then there needs to be a word for communicating how that potential energy, so to speak, ought to be used. And even there, in that sentence, there was no way to help using a synonym for should. However, this word only applies to that which can be done. Asking the question, should human beings fly without the aid of machines, is likely to net you more than a few confused looks, and rightfully so. This action is not something human beings can do, and so a question of whether or not it should be done is irrelevant. This intuition doesn't seem to be very difficult for most people to understand, in my experience. But sometimes, and especially in arguments and lines of reasoning surrounding political and/or moral discussion, the reverse of this distinction tends to be touted as some kind of intelligent counter. Let me lay out some recent examples to demonstrate how I've seen these arguments play out from both sides. Recently, the rather controversial figure Milo Yiannopoulos has signed a rather large publishing deal to write a book. Critics and people who view Yiannopoulos as dangerous think that the publisher should not publish his book. And, for this demonstration at least, their reasons are irrelevant. While there are rebuttals that argue on a should or should not basis, a common response I see, even from people who would consider themselves critics of Yiannopoulos, goes something like this. Publishing companies can publish whatever they want, emphasis added. Nowhere in the position that Yiannopoulos' book should not be published was it argued that the publisher does not have the physical ability or potential to publish whatever book they please. This point is merely a truism, a statement that, while true, is completely irrelevant to the topic at hand. The discussion is whether or not the company should publish the book. Another example I have observed ironically coming from many of the same people who argue should/shouldn't when it comes to the aforementioned book publishing issue has to do with the movie The Red Pill, a documentary about the men's rights movement. Certain theaters around the world refused to show the film, and this action received some backlash. Those who thought it wrong of the theaters not to show the movie argued that it should be shown, or, if you like, should not be censored. Like with the last example, for the purposes of what I am talking about, the validity or specific arguments of those in favor of the film showing are unimportant. But again, a common objection I observed quite a bit when something like, theaters can choose to show whatever films they like, emphasis added. Again, the opposing argument doesn't make a point that somehow theaters do not have the potential to show the movies they wish. The argument was that they should show this particular movie, or at least should not refuse to show it based on personal beliefs. If these examples aren't convincing enough, allow me to provide a much more straightforward exercise. Suppose we are talking about whether or not it is good to walk up to somebody whom you've never met before and just punch them in the face. The intuition of many, including myself, would seem to be that this is not a good moral action and that you should not do such a thing. But what if my response to you telling me that I shouldn't just punch people in the face was, people can do whatever they want? I suspect most would scrunch their face in utter confusion. Of course people have the potential to do such a thing. but the conversation wasn't about possible actions, it was about what potential actions ought to be taken. The purpose of moral conversations is to come to decisions about actions to be taken in a world with multiple branching possibilities. If one thought it impossible to punch someone in the face, just as much as it's impossible to fly without the aid of machines, there would be no need for such conversation. This kind of non sequitur keeps moral and political conversations stagnant and helps no one in any kind of decision making. There is no insight derived from this kind of merely pointing out the obvious, as if no one had any idea that publishing companies can publish books, movie theaters can play movies, and people can punch others in the face. This fallacious refusal to distinguish between the conversations of can and should is just a lazy way of attempting to excuse oneself from an issue while looking as though they had some kind of genius form of reasoning for doing so.